Let's talk about some other aspects of this graph we might clean up. We have some extra space at the top of the graph that we might want to get rid of. We also might want to clean up our axis labels, maybe think about our tick labels a little bit. There's several things about this graph that we might want to change. So first of all, let's talk about our margins because that's what we use to control the amount of space around the graph. So we can go back to our code and we can change our default margins using the par function. Will let us do that. And I'm going to use MAI, which lets me change the margins in inches. And I can look at what those are by default by calling par on MAI in quotes. That tells me what are the current values of that particular graphics parameter. And it's 0.9908, 0.79. So let's start with something like that. For now, I think I'm okay with the bottom and the left axis. That's the first two numbers. I don't think I need quite that much precision in how I set that. So I'm just going to call that 1. I'm going to call that 0.8. It's the top that's probably more space than I need. So let's cut that down to like 0.2 inches and maybe zero 0.2 inches on the right as well. So 0.2 on the top and point right. Remember that's bottom, left, top, right. So let's go ahead and rerun this chunk and see what that looks like. Looks like we're cutting off this tick on the right here from March 11th, but that's okay because eventually I think we're going to want to change this axis because we're going to want to change how things are scaled. So let's not worry about that right now. Also, there are several things about this graph that we're ultimately going to want to customize. And when I know that's the case, I will often get away from using this plot function earlier than later because it doesn't really hurt anything not to use the plot function. I mean, it does take extra lines of code to make the plot. But ultimately, a lot of times I want to start customizing things. And if I've started with plot, I'll have to change a lot more code to customize it than if I just start with the more basic functions for creating the plot. So instead of plot, I'm going to call plot.new. That's going to create a new plot on a new page. I need to call after plot.new, let's go ahead and put a box around the plot. And by default, if you call box, it's going to put a box around the graphing area. And that is this box you're seeing right here around the graphing area. Then I can call plot.window in order to set my xlim and ylim arguments. And this is what's going to establish my coordinate system. My xlim, I've already got set up in terms of my week. I've got a week start and a week end. So I can just say that my xlim is going to be a vector of two numbers. I can use the C function to create that vector. And those numbers are actually going to be dates in POSIX CT type, a week start and a week underscore end. Now my ylim is my par axis. Now ultimately, I'm going to be plotting these data across my full data set. And for the purpose of quality assurance, it helps me if the scale on my y-axis is always the same. And that way it can kind of tell just by what time of year it is if I should be seeing low numbers or high numbers relative to the season. So I'd prefer for all of the graphs I ultimately create to have the same y-axis or the same scale on the y-axis so that I can see in the data the par going up and down with the seasons. So somewhere up here, I want to go ahead and set up my min and max par based on using the whole data set. So sometime up here, I want to set my ymin to be the minimum of table $ par flux. Again, if there's any NAs, in this case I do know there are some NAs, I definitely want to set NARM to true here to make sure that my ymin is not an NA if it finds any of the data set. It's the min after excluding the NAs. So same thing with y max, basically the same code, but calling the max function instead of the min function. And this should give me a y min and y max that will allow me to set my ylim, again using the C function here. So I'm setting up my scaling. My xlim on my time axis is going to start at the week start, end at the week end. My ylim scaling is going to be y min and y max. And remember, R is automatically going to add a 4% buffer to this. Okay, so I have reset my scaling for my y-axis using plot window, or for both axes using plot window. Now I can go ahead and work on my axes. So remember, I'm doing all this manually now, so I have to create axes myself. So I'm going to use the axis function in order to create an axis on side 2. We do a help on axis. I have the option of telling it which side the axis goes on. Here I'm adjusting the y-axis. And in this case, I think I'm probably going to take the defaults. It's going to try to figure out what a pretty axis will look like. So all I have to do is tell it, I need you to create an axis on side 2. And I think that will take care of everything for me. And instead of plot here, I'm going to call points. Because ultimately I'm creating the axis myself, but I want to go ahead and put the data points on those axes. Instead of calling plot that does a whole lot of other stuff, I just want to call points that doesn't do anything but put points on the axes. But it's still the same idea, and then I'm putting a week worth of time and a week's worth of par data on that axis. So let's see how far we've gotten with this and make sure we haven't created any bugs. It seemed to run okay. And yes, now I've lost a bunch of stuff that I was getting from running plot, but now things are starting to look more like I want them to look. We're no longer plotting these according to the min and max of these data. We're plotting to the min and max of the data as a whole. And this is March, and we're still not getting, we don't get that much par in March relative to the middle of the summer. That's why the values are lower here relative to my full scale. I do have tick labels and ticks on my y-axis by using my axis. What I need to add now are an x-axis, but I also need to add a label for my y-axis. Let's take care of that first. And it makes sense to me to do that right after I've created the axis. For the y-axis, I can use the title function. And I need to set the y-lab argument of title. That's going to give me a y-axis label. And I'm going to use some mathematical notation here. So I'm going to use B quote to create an expression. Actually, for this particular one, I could use either B quote or expression. Either one will work. I just tend to use B quote as a reflex. And then I need to specify that expression that I want to be interpreted by PlotMath and create mathematical notation in my graph. In this case, I'm going to start with plain text, so I'll put it in quotes. And then I'm specifying on this axis the par flux, and then in parentheses is where I'm going to want to put my units. And I'm going to go ahead and put my closing parenthesis here just so I don't forget it later. In fact, I can double check to make sure this is working. So this is an expression. So remember, I need an asterisk to specify a separator without space. If I wanted space, I would put a tilde. But in this case, I'm just going to put an open and closed paren. Let's make sure this works. Okay, I have par flux. Oops, and it looks like I'm going to need a little bit more space on that on my margins for my y-axis because I'm cutting off my title for my my label for my y-axis. So that shows me that I don't quite have the right margins yet. Let me give myself an extra 1/10 of the inch on that y-axis. Hopefully that won't cut things off anymore. And I'll go ahead and add some more of my y-axis here. So I need micromoles of, and I'm going to put space here, and I need the Greek letter gamma. So mu is going to give me the Greek letter mu, and I'm going to have no space between that and moles because I want it to be micromoles, all one word. Then I need some space because I want to talk about micromoles of protons, and gamma is the symbol that's typically used for a proton in physics. So I'm going to be specific. I'm talking about micromoles of protons, so we need a gamma. And then it's going to be per square meter per second. So m, and I need a superscript of -2 because that's per square meter. And then some more space, and s for seconds, and again a superscript for per second. So micromoles, all one word, space, gamma, the Greek letter gamma, space, meters per meter squared, or meters to the -2, some space, and seconds to the -1. Those are my units for my par flux. So let's make sure I haven't added any bugs. I'm going to Control-Shift-Enter to run this. Oop, looks like I've got a bug. Oh, I think I'm missing right here. Expressions get upset with you if you don't have some sort of separator between each element of the expression. I was missing a separator here, and it couldn't figure out how to deal with that. Am I missing any others? I don't see any. Let's see if that fixed it. Yep, that did fix it. And oops, I'm still cutting off the top of this. I think I'm setting the wrong margin. Let me go back to my R code. Yep, that's the bottom margin. I should be setting the left margin. So always get those mixed up in my head. That number is the bottom margin. This is the left margin. Bottom, left, top, right. So I should be increasing this one. Let's just go ahead and set it to 1, similar to the bottom margin, and see what that looks like. Add an extra 2/10 of an inch. And sure enough, that gives us a lot of room, actually more room than I want. So one more time. Let's go to set this to 0.9 instead of 1. Rerun this code. Okay, there we go. So we've got a y-axis tick labels, and we've got a y-axis label here. Let's go ahead and re-add an x-axis to this. So I can go back to my code. In this case, the axis for x-axis is going to be, add some space to my code here. There we go, axis. In this case, we're going to call axis POSIX CT because the axis we're creating is based on POSIX CT data. And I'm just going to go ahead and put in an axis on side 1 using axis POSIX CT. Again, I'm going to let it try to figure out how to make this axis rather than me trying to make it myself, at least for now. And we just need to put an axis on side 1 to let R figure it out on its own. So let's see what this looks like. All right, so we're back to having March 5th, 7th, 9th, 11th, and we're cutting off our 11th, but again, we probably are going to be adjusting our x-axis more, so let's not worry about that too much right now. And the last thing that we could do is add a label here, although usually it's self-evident when you have dates and times in terms of what the axis is. And you don't necessarily need to add a label to the axis to specify that you're talking about time here. So let's not worry about that for now. I think we're going to be doing more work on this axis in the long run, but now we've got our graph cleaned up a little bit and getting closer to what we're going to want to repeat for a loop.